Dr. Kellerman, thanks so much for joining me today on the Mark Divine Show. Super nice to meet you, coming all the way
Great to
from
meet
Berkeley,
you.
California. Yeah, I'm excited to chat about your work and your contribution and all the things that are going on in your life. But first off, I generally, as I mentioned earlier, like to just get a read on, for the audience, like what were some of the formative influences in your life? Like, where did you grow up? What were your parents like? How did they shape you? What was the conditioning like that kind of sent you on this trajectory or a trajectory, I should say, because it may have been a different one. Like me, mine was a really different one. And then I had something like right pivoted me. Anyways.
Yeah, totally. No, I love the question. I grew up in Berkeley, California. I live today about 3 miles from the house I grew up in, but I have traveled all around the globe in the interim.
Nice.
And my dad was a really big influence on me professionally because he's a scientist. He devoted his whole career to the problem of how can we make an alternate energy source. And in
Really?
fact, his lab had a big breakthrough that was in the New York Times just a few weeks ago at Lawrence Livermore. And he's really been
Is it
single-mindedly
fusion work that he's working on?
correct. Yeah,
Oh, that's
correct.
awesome. Good for
Yeah.
him.
So for 50 years, he's really been devoting himself to that. And he grew up lower class and, really earned scholarships, et cetera, to get there. I grew up middle
Mm-hmm.
class. My parents spent the money they had to spend on our education.
Mm-hmm.
And I think between that and him in particular as my influence, I had this sense of I have the gift of this great upbringing and this world class education. I also want to devote my life to an essential problem that can help humanity and that will keep me engaged. And so
Right.
mine has been well being, right? It's been a combination of a fascination with the brain. I could learn about and study the brain all day long. And then there's an emotional side to it, which is how do we help people increase the quality of their life? How do we help make these days that we're here on earth more enjoyable, more fulfilling? We have learned to lengthen our lives. We've increased our standard of living, but our lived experience arguably has not improved since we evolved. And so that's been the problem. Now, unlike my dad, who's been able to work on fusion in one lab for his entire career, it's taken me a long time to figure out my way to working on this problem and where and how. And, I continue to wander in that journey and I've been wonderfully happy at BetterUp, but it's a very different place than I thought I would wind up. So
Mm-hmm.
was a path that started in medicine as a psychiatrist, research psychiatrist, took me to public
Mm-hmm.
health, all through the world of technology to learn business and product and work with enterprise populations, lead enterprise populations myself, and have done a lot of science along the way. So
Mm-hmm.
loved the journey and still committed to that very same problem.
Well, you glossed over a long list of ups and downs and challenges and gyrations and made it sound pretty simple. I'm sure it wasn't. What were, just from a developmental perspective, using you as the N=1 subject, what were some of the biggest challenges and pivot points or decision points that kind of led you, to become a psychiatrist? What were some of the big aha moments there? And then, I'd love to talk about BetterUp, and because I don't know much
Sure.
about the organization, although I've seen quite a bit recently in the news about them. So I'd love to.
Yeah. So the single biggest pivot point for me professionally was deciding to leave clinical and research medicine. And by the time I did that, I was in my psychiatry residency. I was in the fMRI research lab where I planned to stay for quite some time. And I looked out ahead at the next 40 or 50 years of my career and realized in a few different dimensions, it was not going to be a good fit. So
Mhm.
first was just the pace of innovation. I wanted to advance. I still want to advance the science. I want to advance our quality of living, not just sort of perpetuate the tools that we have. And I found that in as a practicing physician, a lot of what I would be doing was getting people access to the best that we have today, which is a really important thing to do, but that's different than innovating on the tools of tomorrow. So that
Mm-hmm.
was one point of difficulty. There were a few others, but it was a major crisis of faith for me. It was the only time in my career that I really had to walk away from something without having any idea what I would walk toward.
Right. Yeah.
And that was took me a couple years to find my way from there.
Right. Yeah, I think a lot of people are going through that journey today, right? Because of the COVID and the Great Resignation, and I just had this conversation the other day. It can be very disorienting, right? When you're clear that the path that you were on was not it, but you're not clear about what is the next path. And so,
Totally.
how did you navigate that?
Yeah. I was very fortunate. We don't all have this to have a partner who was able to help, cover our household costs. And I was able to take a couple of years and was still earning money, but try different things, right? Without
Right.
really committing to anything. And that's still the route I recommend is you throw a lot of spaghetti against the wall, get your foot in the door. The things
Right.
you care most about, try to do them for free, offer yourself,
Right.
put yourself out there so you can get the experience and the exposure. And then see what's catching your interest. I think it's all of it is going to teach you something. All of it's going to help you gain some skills. And for me, it all pointed me really toward the emerging digital health sector where I could see these new ways of using technology to improve performance and well-being. And that was
Right.
the beginning of a journey that what I actually wanted to work on didn't exist for several years
Right.
into that journey, but I could see that it would come and it could be there.
Right. I love what you just said, by the way. Do for free what you care most about. I think that's a really powerful um, piece of guidance, right? Because yes, we have to make money, but if we don't know what our passion is, then just continue to pursue it by through service or trying things out, and don't make your money some other way. That's solid advice. Um, so, what was the innovation you saw, or the confluence of technologies that you saw that didn't exist, but you were now are part of?
Yeah, so it did not exist yet that people were thinking about how to use software platforms to help people live better. Software at the time was being used for some urgent challenges and also a lot of consumerism, as you might imagine. And on
Mm-hmm.
the urgent challenges side, it was beginning to be applied to healthcare.
Mm-hmm.
In the beginning, it wasn't yet behavioral health; it was more on the physical health side.
Mm-hmm.
And as it came into behavioral health, it was things like virtual access to a psychiatrist. And actually,
Mm-hmm.
part of how I learned about it was the very, very early, very, very clunky days of like Skype psychiatry.
Mm-hmm.
And a light
My
bulb
wife
went on. That
uses
was one of the
Doxy
light
Me now,
bulbs.
right?
Yeah,
With
it
platforms
was,
like
it was,
Doxy Me
I
and
mean, we're talking like massive cubic TVs and clinics connected to other
right,
massive cubic TVs and clinics with like 100 wires.
right,
But I could see because of the pace of innovation in other products and other realms, how much good could be done through technology to help people grow and change and improve. And um, so much of the project of what I've worked on for the last 15 years is how do we use the best of software to bring that together with the best of human to human support to help
mm-hmm.
people grow, especially when we know that the human to human support is essential and also it alone is not going to scale. So if we want to reach as many people as possible, which is, again, part of this uh, energizing problem for me and my kind of career, we have to use technology. We have to bring technology to
Right, right,
bear on that.
right. What's the current state of the technology solution? And I've heard a lot about personalized medicine and AI kind of um, analysis, as well as telehealth moving into much more engagement or safe environments, right? So, and simple, like Doxy Me and things like that. So, what's the current state, and what's the near term look like, as because we're in an age of accelerated exponential technology? What does it look like in 3 to 5 years?
Yeah.
In your
So I think that there are some bellwethers from the clinical world that we should be paying attention to. Those of us who want to use technology to grow and achieve our goals, what is happening there that can come into our world. The big arena there is called digital therapeutics, and it's a whole world of software that is prescribed to patients for
Hmm.
different types of behavioral and cognitive change. So it's used to treat ADHD. There's different digital therapeutics that are thought to help with things like Alzheimer's.
Hmm.
But there's a whole path for actual FDA approval for software that can help effectively change your brain. And that is something we should all
So
be really excited about. Yeah.
I'm sorry. I'm just trying to get a wrap my wrap my brain around what that would look like. What's the digital? Is it AI? Are we talking to, or are we doing like brain training, like Lumosity, but on steroids, or what are we talking about here?
Yeah, great question. So these would fall mostly in the lumosity category.
Okay.
There's a whole array of digital therapeutics, but the one I'm talking about are more like gamified
Yeah.
trainings
Got
that
it.
have reached a level of effectiveness where now they can be prescribed like a pill.
That's amazing. Wow. Fascinating. Yeah, because there's been a lot of anecdotal evidence and even research to suggest that neurofeedback and actual active engagement with a tool like Lumosity or Dual MBAC does change the brain structures and leads to effectiveness. But when it comes, that's usually for like performance. It's always been used at like from good to great type training. And so now you're suggesting that this is actually being an intervention for cognitive decline or impairment. That's
Yeah.
awesome.
So these are used to take you from, maybe a -6 to a -3.
Yeah.
Um, some of the good to great tools, I don't think have had historically as robust and consistent outcomes.
Really? Okay.
And so I like to point to digital therapeutics just to say like, hey, it's good enough for the FDA. There's a really high bar there. Um, we should all be believers in this as something that's going to have the potential to change our lives. And um, it's also, I think, a more uplifting counterpoint to the negatives around what technology can do to our brain that,
Yeah, for
are
sure.
really
Yeah.
important to keep in mind. There is a flip side to that. If it can affect our brain that much for the negative, there's hope that it can actually do the opposite with thought and care.
Right. Well, garbage in, garbage out.
Yeah.
Positive therapeutic, you know, content in, probably positive benefit out. Um, that's pretty interesting.
I do
So,
think AI is another vein of, all of these rely on AI, by the way. So the
yeah.
development of all of these tools that are at this level of performance rely on AI. So AI is kind of everything. But
Hmm.
the other vein that I think is really interesting for us to think about on the performance side is how is AI going to continue to help make us better at our jobs around the soft skills? So
Right. Hmm.
we've there's a lot of products out there that help you with hard skills, and they're great. But I think even things around having effective conversations, delivering
Right.
effective feedback, these are places we're going to be able to learn a lot from
Right.
tips
Right.
and tricks, and I think gain a lot of self awareness that we don't have based
Hmm.
on the AI.
How close are we to having a virtual therapist, AI generated virtual therapist?
Great question. We have tools today that can do some of the work of a therapist. I think the most important question is, will it ever do the full job of a
Hmm.
therapist? And
Hmm.
um, I think that's an open question. I think it's an open question. Can it do the full job of a therapist if we know that it's a bot, right?
Hmm.
Versus we
Right.
somehow
Right.
think we're talking to a person. And one of the uh, topics that I'm most interested in as a scientist is, what is it that one human being does for another that we believe, machine can't or an AI
Mm-hmm.
can't. What fundamentally is happening when we're connecting human to human that is so different from any other
Mm-hmm.
kind of intervention.
Mm-hmm.
I think AI is going to help us understand that better.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, I think that the answer is part of the work of a therapist can be done by an AI.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't yet seen, a full replacement, and many would say that that is an elusive goal.
Yeah. Yeah. That's fascinating. I agree with that. I'm clearly biased against because of my background as a um, developmental leader, right? As Navy SEAL trainer of SEALs and peak performance coach. I'm really biased against the pharmacological interventions that have trapped so many people in depression
Yeah.
and and addiction.
Yeah.
And what's your take on it? Because I know that they're not all bad. They can be important interventions, but how do we how do you pair the pharmacological with the digital for a better solution?
Yeah. Well, I'll speak to it on the clinical side if that's okay, where I think the data is a
Sure.
little more straightforward.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the accepted wisdom was that therapy works, medication works, they work both together.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that assumes that you have someone who's getting the medication for the right indication under
Right.
close supervision. This is not about addictive
Mm-hmm.
medications, right? So I think that the promise is there that these things can work well together, but the principle can be easily misapplied. And I agree,
Right.
it has gotten a lot of folks into trouble and into solutions that are not sustainable and are ultimately going to work against them.
Yeah. Yeah. And I imagine that having really sophisticated technology can aid in ensuring that someone doesn't go down the wrong path, and even the therapist or whoever the mental health professional is using the
Yeah.
right dosages and transitioning off protocols in the right timelines and et cetera like that.
Yeah.
So are you still at BetterUp? Is that like as a
I am. Yeah.
professional?
I'm the chief innovation officer at BetterUp.
Okay. So describe BetterUp's solution to me. I'm curious about that. I haven't really
So
investigated that.
BetterUp it's a platform for personal and professional development for mostly full-time employees at the Fortune 1000.
Mm-hmm.
Mostly it is used as a B2B solution, but we also have
Right.
a consumer arm. So you could go on the App Store and start working with BetterUp. We're known best for coaching. So we have
Mm-hmm.
almost 4,000 coaches now, every geography, every continent, every language you could imagine,
Mm-hmm.
and hundreds of thousands of people getting coached at a time on the platform.
Mm-hmm.
We also, though, have workshops, we have group coaching, we have content. So there's a broader suite of offerings at this point, and it's meant to map to your needs when you need it, what you need. It
Mm-hmm.
reflects a really holistic vision and philosophy around development, which is that the personal stuff and the professional stuff are all in the same tissues, the
Mm-hmm.
same cells,
Right.
the same nerve fibers, needs to be
Mm-hmm.
addressed and built together.
Mm-hmm.
And it's often the professional pain points that bring people into BetterUp. So, wanting career progress, feeling stalled, working on communication, feedback, difficult conversations, all of these things. And then as people get into the work, it can turn into something that's more fundamental and ends up saving a marriage or
Mm-hmm.
improving
Mm-hmm.
relationship with your kids. There's just
Mm-hmm.
profound change, as that can happen once we get into the muck and start working on ourselves.
Right. So back to that technology piece. Besides, just the app, which someone might schedule and have a virtual contact with a coach. What else? How else is technology involved
Yeah. So
in the process?
we are measuring all of the progress that's happening. So assessments is one piece of it.
Okay.
And that is so each person can know how they're growing. So the coach can actually monitor how they're doing and improve their practice.
Mm-hmm.
There's AI that's used both to match you with the coach. So there's a
Mm-hmm.
pretty sophisticated matching algorithm, and then also in the recommendations of content and activities for you.
Mm-hmm.
In the corporate environment, we also do a lot of integration. So we integrate with an HCM or a learning management system,
I see. Yeah.
so that we're in the flow of work with the
Mm-hmm.
people that we're supporting, and it helps us know who's going to benefit from what at what time.
Oh yeah, I can see how that'd be very important. Awesome. Which kind of brings me to the your insight work with your writing in the book Tomorrow Mind. Um, Subtitle: Thriving at Work with Resilience, Creativity, and Connection Now and in an Uncertain Future, which is on everyone's mind. So, what is the today mind? Before we start talking about the tomorrow mind, what does that look like to you after COVID? Because I mean, everyone's really struggling right now. So, and you see a lot of people at BetterUp. What are the core issues that are
Yeah,
happening right
I love the way you phrase that. Um, so, one of the features of the mindset that we're trying to help people move away from is a very reactive mindset.
now? Mm-hmm.
Even where we started this conversation, where I talked about my big pivot in my career and,
Yeah.
the great resignation, all of these things are one moment of change in a forest of change that we're all navigating over the
Right.
course of our careers. And so, we are trying to help people shift into a more proactive mindset where it's not about any one challenge. It's about all of the challenges to come,
Mm-hmm.
preparing to meet them with greater resilience, greater foresight, greater reserves of motivation. So that's one piece of it. That the other kind of dimension of what we're trying to move away from is a world of work where there's a lot of legacy from the Industrial Revolution, both in how we structure our work and how we think about roles and positions, even in how the corporation is structured, that was suited to a very different kind of work than we do today. It was suited to work that was pretty static over the course of your career, pretty predictable. Those structures and mindsets aren't serving us well anymore. And so
Mm-hmm.
we're trying to bring greater awareness to that and help people lean into things like creativity, lean into things like quickly building trust with all of the many new people we're constantly coming into contact with, skills that will serve us a lot better in a much more dynamic world of work.
Mm-hmm. How do we? What are some of the big themes in your book Tomorrow Mind? So how do we get to where we're thriving with resilience as opposed to reacting to the latest crisis, which, the media is no shortage of glee in shoving down our throats.
Yeah. Yeah. So we outline 5 skills, all of which can be developed and all of which we have researched. And when I say we, I actually mean 2 things. I mean me and my co-author, Marty Seligman, UPenn
Okay.
professor. I
Yep.
also mean me and the team at BetterUp Labs. So a
Okay.
vast team of researchers.
So this all came
Um,
out of your research at Better Up, the book. Yeah.
that's right. So lots
Great.
of original research uh, in identifying these 5 skills and also in developing the science behind them.
Mm-hmm.
And they are I can share the 5 skills
Sure.
if
Why don't you just
helpful.
share them, and then we'll dig into one or two of them.
Great. So the
Okay.
acronym is PRISM. P is prospection, R is resilience, I is innovation, S is social support, and our particular take on social support is what we call rapid rapport, and the
Okay.
M is mattering.
Yeah. Got it. Okay. I like the perspectiving. I mean, that's kind of a cool word, even. So why don't we start at the beginning? So what does that mean? How do we teach someone to have greater perspective on themselves and others and the situations in their life?
Yeah, so prospection is the ability
Or
to
perspective.
imagine and plan for the future. Pragmatic prospection is a kind of a subset on that. It's pretty much what we mean whenever we say prospection, which is really effective imagining and planning for the future. There's a lot of cognitive traps that we can fall into. Some of
Mm-hmm.
them we're hardwired, they're biases, and some of them are more individual, and we have to acknowledge them and overcome them. The first piece is understanding that there's 2 phases to prospection. So phase 1 is slow. Sorry. Let me start that over. There's two
That's okay.
phases to prospection. Phase one is fast. It
Mm-hmm.
is optimistic. It is divergent. And
Mm-hmm.
then phase two kicks in after that. And phase one might last a few seconds. Phase two is more like
Mm-hmm.
minutes, and it's much more
Mm-hmm.
evaluative. It's slower. It can tend toward the pessimistic. Both
That's
are
interesting.
really important in terms of getting us to um, a helpful state of preparation for what
Mm-hmm.
is coming or could be coming. And we can make different mistakes in each phase.
Mm-hmm. It sounds a lot like Daniel Kahneman's System 1 and System 2 thinking.
Isn't it amazing how there's so many models that
Yeah,
align to this?
they
And
are. Yeah, it's
to
cool.
me,
Yeah.
it's like that's how you know you're getting to truth, is
Right.
when all of those
Totally.
things start aligning.
I know. I totally like. I've been teaching leadership development now for like 20 years, and I finally went back to get my doctorate. Started a year and a half ago at Pepperdine in global leadership and change. And here I thought like I was like on this bleeding edge of innovation and vertical development and shifting consciousness and perspective. I'm like, oh wow,
Hmm.
there's a whole lot of other people out there doing this work.
I think,
It's
yeah, I think part of it is just how siloed everyone is in this work, right?
right.
That you
Exactly.
could come to the same conclusion in 5 different disciplines and
That's right.
not realize it. It's part of why I'm
Well, the
really
key,
drawn to interdisciplinary work.
100% holistic, integrated, cross-disciplinary work is so important. We need to talk to each other more. We saw that, of course, with the pandemic, just how, if you get siloed and, we don't have conversations, then it could lead to improbable or problematic results. That's the word I'm looking for. So one of the things, back to perspection, um, in system one, system two, or fast and slow thinking, the challenge people have is um, both can be um, imperfect, of course, right? And that sounds kind of obvious, but when it comes to the fast twitch thinking, we have the really the hidden biases and the conditioning that is reactionary, and then the slower decision making is usually the mental models really are just the beliefs are broken, right, or flawed, and are leading the decision making down to suboptimal results. So they really are completely different types of training or discovery, right? So can you describe like best practice or top tool for each one of those different ways of developing perspection?
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll start with phase one. A common error in the face of uncertainty is to go to the worst possible outcome. And we can do that very quickly without even realizing that it's
Right.
happened. And suddenly we
Catastrophizing.
accept with certainty that that
Mm-hmm.
worst outcome is where we're going to be. So imagine 4 p.m. on a Friday afternoon, you get a message from your boss's assistant. He or she needs to talk to you at 4:30 or 5, no context given. A lot of us have the automatic thought, I'm getting fired,
Right.
and even start, behaving like it's going to like clearing our desk, messaging our loved one. Um, and that's a trap. We have in doing that deprived ourselves of a really important moment of opportunistically thinking about all the possibilities, more realistically evaluating them. So part of the trick is slowing that down,
Mm-hmm.
and retraining ourselves to say, okay, I just thought of the worst possible outcome. What's the best possible outcome? So in that case, maybe there's a windfall in the budget and you're getting a raise and they just found out and they need to close it out of the book. There's all kinds of very improbable positive things that could happen. And then what's
Mm-hmm.
the most likely outcome? What's the most likely reason that your boss talks to people late on a Friday afternoon? It's probably a
Mm-hmm.
last minute work thing that's come up, or they have a
Mm-hmm.
family emergency and they need your help to cover some. There's a million most likely reasons that are neither
Mm-hmm.
getting fired nor getting a raise. Painting
Mm-hmm.
those out, really retraining yourself to see a more realistic distribution of what those outcomes could be.
Mm-hmm.
People who catastrophize a lot are at much greater risk for negative outcomes from uncertainty.
Mm-hmm.
And so this activity alone is something that some people need to do over and over and over and over again, and can be massively impactful in transforming how we think about what's coming. On
Right.
the phase two side, I mentioned that sometimes that also can tend toward the pessimistic.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there's a lot of ways of retraining ourselves on phase two, which is again about evaluation, and we want to be realistic. There's a lot of great structures that can take you through goal planning and imagining obstacles and how you're going to overcome them. Um, I also think this is a phase where people who tend toward the pessimistic have to take a look at belief systems about pessimism.
Mm-hmm.
So some of us are pessimistic because we think that thinking about the worst outcome or preparing for a negative outcome is going to somehow magically help us avoid it.
Mm-hmm.
There's lots of reasons that are not quite conscious that we can tend toward the pessimistic. In
Mm-hmm.
reality, optimism, people who have greater optimism see better outcomes across the board, right?
Mm-hmm.
Health wise, mental health, physical health, professionally. And the reason it's not that they're deluded about what's going to happen, it's that optimism motivates us to keep at it and to keep working. And so we are more likely to get to a better outcome when we're optimistically motivated. So
Right.
sometimes in the phase two, we need to allow ourselves to think more about those optimistic outcomes and really plan for those and
Right.
really think about how are we going to get to those rather than just focusing the energy on mitigating the bad outcome.
Right. Yeah, there's so much great stuff there. Um, when you talk about positive mindset or positivist psychology, um, a lot of people just think that positive self-talk in itself, or relying on affirmations, is kind of bold. It's like it doesn't really work, and I would say that that's true if that's the only tool that you have in your toolkit. Um, so I'd like to ask two parts of this question. One is how do we if we are a cast, and maybe we know it, or people have told us that we're a catastrophizer and we're pessimistic, right? So we tend toward pessimism and seeing the negative outcomes, glass half empty kind of thing. How do we shift that? How do we route that out or override that so that we're not catastrophizing, and we're because it starts with self-talk and then getting underlying to those, understanding
Yeah.
why those reactionary behaviors were conditioned in the first place. So now we're getting into kind of therapeutic process. And then I also want to, like, maybe these are two different questions, just kind of relate this to toxic positivity, because that's another one of those terms that has kind of popped up recently, and people really worried about toxic positivity and kind of the blowback from that. Like, in the workplace, psychological safety doesn't come from inauthentic positivity, right? Because that could really have a blowback.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure if
Yeah.
my question was really clear, but there's kind of two sides to
No,
that.
that was
How
very
does one
clear.
move away from the negative, and how does one avoid toxic positivity if you're trying to be a leader or in charge of culture, kind of thing?
Yeah. The answers are different to both. And I'll go in order that you asked them, but the overarching theme is anything worth having takes time to get.
Yes.
So on the how do you overcome a negative worldview, pessimism, I think so. First, you have to have awareness, you have to have insight into the fact that that's a challenge for you,
Right.
and that it's different for you from other people. You don't just think everyone lives that way. Then you need the motivation around it, right?
Mhm.
So, as I said, a lot of people have reasons to hold on to it. And even if they do an exercise or two, they're not really committed to moving away from it. Um, the motivation will come from different places for people. So some people, their pessimism has gotten them to a place of depression, and they realize they need to course correct. They need to actually remediate because they're
Mhm.
in an unhealthy place.
Mhm.
Um, some people, it's just actually learning. The more you learn about the literature on optimism, it can really motivate you to say, okay,
Mhm.
hey, I want to live longer. I want to have a healthier immune system. I want to see these better professional outcomes. So I think educating yourself on optimism, if you're just curious and you think maybe there's something there you want to work on, pick up something like Learned Optimism by Marty Seligman, my co-author.
Mhm. Mhm.
Wonderful book,
Mhm.
with great science. A slightly more recent publication of his on that has similar content, a whole chapter on optimism is called Flourish. both
Mm-hmm.
are great resources to just start to educate yourself about why should I work on this? What am I going to
Mm-hmm.
get out of it?
Right.
So once you have the insight and you're motivated, then it's really the work of cognitive behavioral change, right? So noticing the thought patterns, challenging them, and doing it a different way. And we can do
Mm-hmm.
it on our own. A coach or a therapist can be great to help you with that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then there's some online resources. I think, the human support is still probably the most effective. Um, but for people who are really motivated and understand the concepts, there's no reason you can't do it on your own.
Right.
On the toxic positivity side, it's a really important question, and I think um, it's one of the types of challenges that anything in the kind of positive psychology, positive behavioral sciences, that there's constantly going to be challenges to that work and that
Mm-hmm.
science. And previous generations of thinkers like Abraham Maslow, who tried to get
Mm-hmm.
these things off the ground, were unsuccessful in part because they couldn't overcome these challenges.
Mm-hmm.
So I think all of them have to be taken seriously and, really addressed. When I hear about toxic positivity, it's exactly what you said, Mark, where it's sort of a shallow positivity where people
Right.
know that underlying it is not that depth of authentic positive feeling.
Right.
Um, that's never been what the positive psychology is about. And I think part of the where things went a little bit awry was people also thought the be all and the end all was happiness. And
Right.
so happiness is positive emotion.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of 5 ingredients of well-being as defined by the early positive psychology people. So
Mm-hmm.
it also included relationships, deep engagement with your
Mm-hmm.
work, a
Mm-hmm.
sense of achievement, a sense of meaning and purpose and mattering. So
Mm-hmm.
those don't always come with positive emotions. Relationships can be difficult,
Right.
right? So again, it's the good life, the meaningful life, the rich life. It's hard, one, right? It's through a lot of effort and energy, but it's so rewarding.
Right.
Um, and we can't give each other a good life through sort of shallow compliments,
Right.
or a meaningless smile. Relationships take time and they take work. And that, I think, is the real core of the issue of toxic positivity is relationships.
Right. Right.
What is the quality of the relationships at work? And that is something everyone's struggling with. But that is what I hear at the crux of that question.
Totally. Yeah, I totally agree. And Brene Brown's work comes to mind, and this idea that a really powerful culture is one that's doesn't deny that someone's having a bad day or there's serious issues going on in people's lives, but are okay to have those conversations in a sensitive way, and which takes skill, obviously. So that's and the skill. If a leader doesn't have that skill, then they tend to avoid it, right? And so a lot of I have this theory that most of teams, the real limiting factor in the team is the leader who's unwilling to do this kind of deep work, and
For
so then
sure.
then the energy gets really stuck.
For sure. And we actually have a ton of data to show that resilient leaders have much more resilient teams and vice
Yeah.
versa, much lower burnout, higher
Right.
retention, higher innovation. And the scale of the impact is kind of hard to believe. But then if you think about your own lived experience and what it feels like to report to a manager who is struggling,
Right.
it takes a toll on us. It
It
really
does.
does. And it takes a toll on our ability to be resilient.
Right. Wow, this has been a great conversation. I got to wrap up soon here and let you go, but I did want to help listeners understand really the difference between working with a therapist and working with a coach, and
Sure.
where is that kind of overlap possible, and where is
Uh-huh.
it really shouldn't happen, right? And when you should go from
Yeah.
one to the other.
Such a great question. So therapists can, as a therapist, treat clinical conditions, get reimbursement from insurance, et cetera. There's a licensure process that they go through that is not dissimilar from what a doctor would go through. Um, Therapists do also see high functioning people for non clinical purposes
Mhm.
without insurance reimbursement.
Mhm.
And that can look a lot like coaching. So it
Right.
does get confusing. There are also therapists who have a separate shingle as a coach. So it's the
Right.
same person, but they're also doing coaching. Now, on the flip side of it, coaches do not do clinical work. So executive coaches or professional development coaches do not do clinical work. They do not treat clinical conditions. If they think someone's at risk for something clinical, they might say something and try to help them seek help, but they're not
Mm-hmm.
going to treat them themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they are wonderful resources for building personal and professional development skills, even things like stress management and coping. So think of coaches as something that everyone can benefit from, and therapists as people with specialized skills for clinical conditions
Right.
who may also happen to be coaches.
Yeah. And so I thank you for that. It's a very good description. On the therapist side, probably one of the most important things is to recognize the boundaries and to have that professional uh, clarity, right? Because I'm thinking right now of the FTX kind of blow up, and there was just a big discussion in the Wall Street Journal about the therapist, the psychologist who worked with Sam Bankman-Fried and the team
Mm-hmm.
at Alameda and FTX, and he was also their coach, right? And
Mm.
so the discussion was he kind of crossing boundaries, and it seemed like he did a good job at not doing that, right? He's coaching clients, there's coaching clients, and therapy or psychology was that. But it can be really slippery slope if someone comes to you on both sides of the equation, right? And then from the coaching perspective, there are so many coaches now who are getting trained in hypnotherapy and NLP and X, Y, and Z, and they're doing therapy without being professionally licensed. So I can see why it'd be really confusing for a lot of people.
Yeah, I think you want to do your homework on who you're working with. I would make sure that they used evidence-based practices,
Mm-hmm.
meaning they're working with techniques that have been proven out to be effective. Those will work. They will not waste your time, and the benefits have been proven and well studied, as well as the safety of the methods that they're
Right.
using.
Right. And it might take, I like that you do AI kind of generated matchups because my experience is, I had to probably go through 4 different therapists before I finally found one that, it could work the EMDR and the different processes that were really going to be effective with me. So it's
Yeah,
going to take some time to find a fit sometimes.
it can, and that is something that can be hard to stick with if you're in a tough place. That's what
Right.
actually a big challenge, and um, it's one of the places where technology can help us. So there's at least the promise of these great matches, and at BetterUp, that's certainly something we see, and we've invested in. Lots of platforms use them, and they're trying to
Mm-hmm.
get better and better to help make that finding the right person an easier and more scientific process.
I could see that tool being really valuable to outsource or to white label to other, to the coaching and to the therapy profession. Revenue opportunity for you there, Miss Innovation Officer. Okay, awesome work. So, last question: what's like next for you? Like, what's your next major innovation push? Really where you're leaning forward and doing some thought work around.
Hmm. Um, let's see. There's a few areas that I'm really interested in right now. I think, at BetterUp, one of the things that we're constantly looking at is how do we more quickly build trust and relationships and rapport with our coach, with our colleagues, with our customers. And without, saying too much, we're doing a lot of AI work looking at that I'm
Mm-hmm.
hopeful will result in tools that can help all of us connect more quickly and more effectively together. Um, I would say on the personal side, I'm increasingly interested in how do we bring more of these well-being tools upstream, quote unquote, to middle schoolers, elementary school, even high school.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There has been a push for some of it, but I think that we need more of a continuous mechanism of getting the latest science to the teachers who want to help kids build these skills for the rest of their lives. So something I'm interested in trying to learn more about and see how I can help with it.
I love it. I love this idea of using technology to solve problems that the same technology created. We have to, right?
Oh my gosh,
Everything's in
isn't it the
balance
truth?
ultimately, I think, in the world. So it's great to see this. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Kellerman. I really appreciate your time. It's fascinating. And I look forward to reading your book, Tomorrow Mind. And we'll put all the notes up on the podcast. And yeah, if there's anything else we can do for you.
Thank you so much.